Please, contribute to my father-in-law's caregiving costs a bit. A call out of the blue from my estranged eldest son's wife, whose relationship with me had always been less than cordial. Her voice, seeping through the phone, was filled with unmistakable discontent and anger. Caught off guard, I found myself rapidly bombarded with her sharp, fast-paced accusations. Caught in the whirl of emotions, I was on the verge of a heated retort. But it turned out that we were misdirecting our anger. The true enemy for us was elsewhere. I'm Melissa, 72 years old. Up until a few decades ago, I was a mother of two, caught up in the whirlwind of parenting. But that feels like a distant past now. Both my eldest son and daughter, who once required so much of my attention, now have families of their own and are leading their own lives. As for me, I've been quietly spending my uneventful days for the past few years. I had no idea that a major incident was about to swoop in. It all started with a phone call. One day, just as I was about to prepare lunch, my smartphone rang out of the blue.
Oh, who could that be?
A quick look revealed it was my eldest son's wife, Sandra. What an unusual occurrence. I froze for a few seconds with the phone in my hand. Ever since my eldest son, Daniel, got married, Sandra and I hadn't exactly been on good terms. An unexpected call from her. We'd been drifting apart over the years. Actually, we hadn't even contacted each other, let alone met, for more than a decade.
Hello?
I managed to stammer out a greeting, my voice shaking with an odd sense of tension, only to be met with an obviously disgruntled voice from the other end.
Mother-in-law?
It's been a while. This is Sandra. Her voice, low and imposing, didn't give me the leisure to feel nostalgic.
It's been a while indeed. How have you been? Is there something you need?
Honestly, she wouldn't have called if she didn't have something on her mind. As I pondered this and asked, Sandra let out a small sigh before slowly and clearly speaking her piece. Yes. I'm calling about my father-in-law.
What? Him? Why?
Before I could finish my question, Sandra cut me off, raising her voice slightly.
I understand that you have your own circumstances, mother-in-law, but if this continues, we'll be in ruins.
Eh?
Ruins? What do you mean?
As I expressed my confusion, Sandra continued with even more excitement in her voice.
Please, contribute a bit to my father-in-law's caregiving costs.
Eh?
Caregiving costs?
Her way of speaking was filled with an inexplicable anger towards me. The quick chatter seemed to foster the situation.
I understand it's difficult. We also can't provide care due to our work commitments, and we feel bad about that. But despite giving so much already, to ask us to increase the monthly financial support. Isn't that a bit outrageous?
With each new topic, elder care, financial support, I was hearing words that were foreign to me. I was confused and hastily asked for clarification.
Wait, elder care? For your father-in-law?
What?
Daniel's father. I'm talking about your husband.
Her tone was almost mocking. Since the start of the phone call, I'd held my tongue, but her blatant attitude finally got under my skin. Excuse me? I don't have a husband.
What?
I unintentionally raised my voice. Perhaps my reaction, or my response, was unexpected. A silence ensued. I took a breath and spoke. Sorry for getting upset and coming off as rude. But it's true that I don't have a husband. I divorced him 10 years ago, so I'm single now. Didn't Daniel tell you? From the other side of the phone, I heard a gasp. She probably knew nothing about this. Something was off. The call seemed to be getting lengthy, so to hear the details, Sandra and I decided to meet after several years. The next day, we arranged to meet at a diner. Seeing Sandra after so long. It's obvious we've both aged, but she seemed particularly worn out. I didn't remember her being so unkempt. After a brief greeting, I listened to her story, which went like this. Since their marriage, under Daniel's direction, Sandra had consistently been sending a fixed amount of money to my ex-husband. 10 years ago, Daniel suggested they increase the amount they were sending. The reason being, my ex-husband needed elder care. Up until that point, Sandra had been sending quite a sum of money, so to send any more would be difficult, she protested. But Daniel told her, "We're almost 40, right? Yet, we still don't have any children. Probably, we won't be able to show our parents a grandchild. Despite me being the firstborn. So, at least, let's support our parents financially as a form of filial piety." Daniel and Sandra had married relatively late, so they had not been blessed with children yet. As a woman, I understood her anxiety. So, I had never brought it up, but apparently, Sandra felt quite guilty about this. And so, she had agreed to increase the amount. At that time, I thought what Daniel said was right, so I agreed. But then, just recently, he told me we needed to increase it even more. Sandra was staring down and trembling. We're almost 50, and considering our retirement, we can't afford to give more. She protested to Daniel. Then, hearing the words that Daniel replied with, I felt like fainting. That idiot had the nerve to tell his own wife, "You haven't served your duty as a wife, so at least you could provide money." What an awful thing to say! Oh, how pitiful! I couldn't say anything. But our finances are truly tight, so I ended up taking out my frustration on you, mother-in-law. I apologize. I should be the one apologizing. I'm not sure how to make amends. As Sandra expressed her deepest apologies, I did the same without missing a beat. I decided to have my son apologize at a later date, but there are still many things that do not make sense. Firstly, I have never received any cash from Daniel either before or after our marriage. I've never even heard of him giving me any form of allowance. Next, this is the first time I'm hearing that my ex-husband requires care. Speaking of 10 years ago, that was around the time we got divorced, but he was fit as a fiddle back then. If something happened after the divorce, I should have heard about it from my eldest daughter. Moreover, according to Sandra, Daniel visits my ex-husband's house every weekend to help with his care. I tried going there on my day off, but Daniel stopped me. He said, "You don't need to come because Mom doesn't like you." What? Why on earth would Daniel keep our divorce a secret? As we continued talking, it became clear that there were a lot of misunderstandings between us. I thought Sandra didn't like me, and she thought the same about me. But it turns out the cause of all this was Daniel. Thinking back, Daniel used to tell me things like, "Sandra said your cooking isn't good or she really doesn't want to come over." That's why I always had a hard time with Sandra. Upon asking, it seems that Sandra felt the same way. She had heard from Daniel that I had said things like, "I wanted someone younger," or "She is not thoughtful or charming." The reason she stopped coming to our house was also because Mom doesn't like it, according to Daniel. But when we think back, neither of us remembers saying such things. Right now, as we are talking face to face, I don't feel any hostility from Sandra towards me. So, it seems that all this was caused by Daniel. What on earth was he thinking, causing a rift between his wife and his mother? I decided to call Daniel first. Without touching on the main issue, I asked about the situation. Although Daniel seemed a bit annoyed, he responded normally. But as soon as I casually mentioned, "By the way, how is Sandra doing?"
I'd love to catch up with you too sometime.
His attitude changed completely. Suddenly, he became flustered and started to hang up the phone, saying he was busy. Even though I insisted on continuing the conversation, he lost his patience and yelled,
"Stop being so persistent. No wonder Dad divorced you. Even Sandra hates you. Can't you take a hint?"
Then he forcefully hung up the phone. He was clearly flustered. Of course, he would be. He would be in trouble if Sandra and I met. After all, he even kept our divorce a secret from Sandra. There's no doubt he hung up the phone in a panic. Sandra's words started to feel more and more like the truth. Regrettably, if this is true, I don't think I can side with Daniel anymore. For now, leaving Daniel aside, I decided to contact my eldest daughter. It was to know about the current state of my ex-husband. As expected, my ex-husband was as fit as a fiddle. This would mean that someone is lying. Daniel is expected, but the problem lies with the ex-husband. Is my ex-husband also in on the lie, or maybe? After discussing with Sandra, we decided to explain to our eldest daughter that it was all because of something Daniel did, and asked her for cooperation. Since Daniel's birthday was coming up, we used that as a pretext. The plan was to celebrate his birthday as a family after a long time. My daughter invited Daniel and her father. Although I thought it was a bit forced, Daniel wasn't completely against the idea and responded with, "Really, at this age?" Apparently, he was more excited about it and said,
"Don't forget my birthday present."
What an easygoing son I have. According to my daughter, my ex-husband was excited to see me. Both were blissfully unaware of their impending judgment. Sandra and I had a thorough discussion, and we prepared for that day. We decided to use my daughter's house for the meeting. Just in case, we asked my daughter's husband to stay in another room. In full readiness, we waited, and my ex-husband and Daniel arrived together. My ex-husband, whom I hadn't seen in 10 years, saw me, and his face lit up as he rushed towards me. "Long time no see." Oh, brings back memories.
"Yes, it's been a long time. You seem as lively as ever."
He didn't seem to need any care at all. I said it with a touch of irony, but he misinterpreted it as a compliment and scratched his head in delight. "Yeah. People often tell me I don't look 70. You also look pretty good for your age. I think I might fall for you again." Hold on, that's creepy. I managed to swallow those words which were on the tip of my tongue and kept a smile on my face. Once we all sat at the table and my daughter poured the tea, I took a deep breath. "Now, shall we begin?" I glanced at Daniel, who was hungrily devouring the served tea and snacks. I caught his eye and started a conversation.
"You're already 47, Daniel. Time flies, doesn't it? You're supposed to age."
"Yeah, you become a total granny too." Daniel snorted, and my ex-husband corrected him. "What are you talking about? Your mom looks much younger than her peers."
"That's true. There are many who need care at this age, right?"
At my words, both Ken and my ex-husband looked flustered. A few seconds later, my ex-husband coughed awkwardly, trying to divert the conversation. "Well, I'm glad you seem well. I've always wanted to get in touch, but you told me not to."
"Yes, I'm doing well, thank you."
I responded with a faint smile, and my ex-husband, seemingly relieved, began chatting away. "Ah, I'm glad to see you. In fact, I was thinking that today might be a good time to ask if we might spend our remaining years together." With those words, my ex-husband looked at me with a sharp expression that seemed to have been somewhat prepared. Then, as if delivering a well-rehearsed punchline, he firmly stated, "Our remaining years aren't going to be long. Let's live together." I wish he'd save his dreams for when he's asleep. Looking at my ex-husband, who was gazing at me with sparkling eyes, I gave him a particularly bright smile and clearly told him,
"Oh, back before our divorce, I was nothing more than a maid. Now, am I to be a caregiver? Isn't that convenient?"
My ex-husband was taken aback. "Because you're in need of care now, aren't you?" I continued, which left him gaping. Where had his smug expression and overflowing confidence from moments ago gone? He turned to Daniel, who was sitting next to him with a face like a carp, looking for help. Daniel looked at me with his eyebrows twitching.
What are you talking about? Dad and Mom are both still in good health, aren't they?" "Oh, is that so? Ah. Speaking of which, Daniel, I heard you've been visiting him every weekend recently? How filial of you."
Daniel stuttered. Why yes. His mouth twitching.
"That's right. I have a present for you, partly as a birthday gift."
As I brought my bag closer, I pulled out a file from it and handed it to them. Daniel took it in his hands, his eyes wide.
This is..."
In the file Daniel was holding, there were several photos of him and an unfamiliar woman, looking very intimate. These were all collected by the private investigator. It was strange for him to leave the house every weekend, even though there was no need for caregiving. So, I decided to hire a PI along with Sandra. The result was damning. Daniel was meeting his mistress every week. He was caught off guard, and I was able to obtain a significant amount of evidence easily. Even the PI was amazed, saying, "It's rare for an investigation to be this easy."
"How about it? They're well taken, aren't they?"
Daniel, still holding the file, was trembling. Perhaps out of embarrassment, his face turned bright red.
"Why, you invaded my private life." "Private? I was told you were brazenly walking around arm in arm."
With a face as red as a beet, Daniel stared at the file.
"And? What happened with this lady?"
I asked, and Daniel hesitated for a moment before slamming the file down on the table and glaring at me.
"You know full well. That's right. She's my mistress. It's all because Sandra has lost her appeal. If I was satisfied with Sandra, I wouldn't be having an affair."
His outrageously self-serving statement made me want to throw the tea in front of me at him. I couldn't believe my adorable son had turned into such a worthless man. Like father, like son, how pathetic. After all, the reason I divorced my ex-husband in the first place was his infidelity. My ex-husband has always had a habit of cheating. But with his smooth talk and persuasive words, I somehow ended up forgiving him. In the midst of all this, it was 10 years ago that we finally got a divorce. An affair came to light then, and the other party was a mutual acquaintance. Furthermore, it was revealed that my ex-husband had told his affair partner that
the wife is just like a maid. There's no love there.
Thinking that I didn't want to spend the rest of my life with this man, I finally decided to get a divorce. Fortunately, I could get sufficient amount of property division, so I didn't have to worry about living expenses.
When we got divorced, Daniel also said that it's impossible to have an affair, I said. What's impossible is getting caught. I was confident that I could handle it well, he replied.
Yet he had the nerve to say this despite being caught. Even when I presented him with so much evidence, he showed no signs of remorse. I exaggerated on purpose, saying,
"Even then, I received enough property division, which saved me. I wonder how much will you pay to your lady, Sandra?"
At this, Daniel visibly paled.
"Hold on. Mom, please. Don't tell her. Please."
He stumbled to his feet and knelt in front of me.
"You don't like Sandra either, right? I'm getting a divorce, so please keep it to yourself."
His pathetic groveling reminded me of my ex-husband.
I won't tell,
I said, and Daniel looked relieved. As he began to say, "Good. Mom, you understand," I called to the next room through the door.
because there's no need to tell.
Right, Sandra?
What?
At that moment, Sandra, her face as ferocious as a guardian deity, appeared from the next room as the door was flung open. Daniel screamed pitifully and crumpled to the ground.
What, Sandra? Why are you here? Wait. I'm so confused. My head is spinning.
While he said this, Sandra strode over and stood imposingly in front of Daniel.
Why? That's my line. What about the caregiving, the filial piety? I heard everything from your mom.
But, stammered Daniel, blinking rapidly, but Sandra wouldn't let him get a word in.
I don't want your excuses. All the complaints you've made about your mother were lies, weren't they? What did you want to do? What joy did you get from driving a wedge between your wife and your mother?
Overwhelmed by Sandra's fury, Daniel dropped to his seat, shaking his head vehemently.
No, it's not like that. I just had a little shortage of pocket money, so I collaborated with my dad and said it was a remittance.
When Sandra was puzzled, Daniel mumbled.
If Sandra and Mom got along, it would be exposed immediately. That's why.
In other words, it seems he and his father had been using the money they claimed was a remittance. The reason for the increase in amount 10 years ago was due to property division to me, which had left his father poorer. Yet, his father still had some of his retirement money left, and they should have been able to maintain a normal life. When I pressed them, they hesitantly confessed. Apparently, they both had women they liked and had been giving them gifts. Upon learning the truth, Sandra let out a deep sigh and looked down at Daniel with eyes that were as disdainful as if she were looking at garbage.
As you wish, let's get divorced. Also, all the money you lied about and took from our finances, I want it all back. Of course, it is apart from property division. What? But I don't have that kind of money. Sell your beloved, precious car. It can't be helped. You can pay the rest in installments. If you don't pay, I'll show up at your workplace. I'll also spread the word among our mutual friends. Oh, my beloved car? Daniel muttered, a hint of tears welling in his eyes.
He glared fiercely at Sandra and raised a voice of protest.
That's horrible. You're a monster. And to spread this around to my buddies, aren't you ashamed? You're admitting that you're a pitiful woman who got cheated on. Daniel.
I instinctively tried to intervene, but Sandra stopped me. She squatted down to match the height of Daniel's face, and without blinking, she said,
I haven't done anything to be ashamed of. I didn't lie, nor did I cheat. If I dare to say, I lacked judgment in men. I ended up marrying you. That's the only thing I'm ashamed of.
Daniel, who was declared this at point-blank range, seemed to be at a loss for words. He flopped down on the floor, crying quietly. Sandra stood up with a slightly refreshed face and said, I'll consult with a lawyer later and contact you. Daniel didn't respond and just kept crying. In the end, he stayed like that for a while even after Sandra and I returned home. It seemed that my ex-husband tried to cheer him up due to his deep depression, but he lashed out at him, saying it was your fault. Eventually, Sandra and Daniel divorced. As promised, it seems he's paying money back each month. To my surprise, Daniel came to me crying for help, but I turned him away at the door. There is a limit to being shameless. He also tried to get money from his mistress, but of course, she refused. Apparently, she quickly abandoned him when he ran out of money. What's more, the mistress turned out to be a married woman. He seems to be in a hopeless situation. On a calm afternoon, over coffee at a cafe, Sandra said.
He seems to be really cornered and contacts me every day begging for help. He was crying on the phone the other day too. Look, here he goes again.
And showed me her smartphone where Daniel's name was listed repeatedly in the call history. When I replied, "I'm sorry, I raised him wrong," she gave a bright smile.
It's okay. It's not about how you raised him, it's genetic, isn't it? From your ex-husband.
Haha. We looked at each other and laughed, agreeing.
Indeed.
Now, Sandra and I meet regularly to catch up. We've become best friends, a far cry from our mother-in-law and DIL days. I wish we had become like this sooner, but it can't be helped. It's all due to that good-for-nothing ex-husband and son. Rather than regretting the wasted time, we have to enjoy what's to come.
There's still a lot of life ahead of us, right, Sandra?
I raised my coffee cup, and Sandra smiled and raised her cup as well. Yes, absolutely, Melissa. And we both laughed again, clinking our coffee cups in a small toast. After quitting his job post-marriage, Brian, who now only works a part-time job 3 days a week, keeps dumping household chores on me, despite my full-time job. To add insult to injury, he's stingy with living expenses and started ignoring me when I confronted him about using my credit card without permission. Hey, I'm at my limit. I complained after dinner one day, but Brian didn't even look at me and went upstairs to his study. Determined to talk it out, I was halfway up the stairs when I heard Brian's voice. He seemed to be on the phone with his mother, Zoe.
Mom? Lily is still acting all high and mighty. I'm fed up, so why not introduce me to some cute girl? It's fine, she's totally into me. She won't complain even if she finds out.
I felt like my breath had stopped. How much does this man look down on me? Asking his own mom to set him up with someone else, unforgivable. I bit my lip and whispered to myself, "Just you wait. I'll make you regret ever taking my feelings for granted." I'm Lily, a 34-year-old housewife. I work as a regular employee at a major company. 7 years ago, I met Brian when he joined the company right after graduating from college, and we became close as we worked on the same team. His slightly needy side was cute to me, and I was happy he relied on me, being older. After we started dating, I accepted Brian's proposal and we got married. Brian lost his dad in his teens, but I never got the impression he was a mama's boy, and we only saw Zoe at Christmas. Zoe lived a bit far away and never just dropped by, so Brian and I were having a peaceful married life. However, Brian's actions suddenly cast a shadow over everything.
We can live on your salary alone, right?
One day, Brian suddenly broached the subject after coming home from work.
Excuse me? I quit my job today.
I was shocked by Brian's nonchalant declaration. Without showing any remorse, Brian continued with a smile.
From tomorrow, it's all on you to work hard, Lily. Oh, and I'm counting on you for the housework too. I'll help out a bit.
I was speechless.
Wait a minute. You're telling me this after the fact? Yeah. It's my decision to make.
Brian had been working in a different department for a while. He didn't seem to be struggling with his job, but maybe he was stressed? Still, he could have at least consulted me before quitting. Trying not to show my disappointment, I asked, "So, you're becoming a house husband?"
I don't want to do housework all day. Then how about looking for a part-time job? I want you to contribute to our finances.
All right, I'll give you money for groceries and utilities. You take care of the rest of the payments. And I'd like an allowance of $1,000.
$1,000?
I exclaimed in surprise, to which Brian nonchalantly replied,
"It's cheaper than hiring a housekeeper."
His words bothered me. He must be planning to work within my tax allowance. I've never heard of someone working part-time, earning less than $10,000 a year, and getting a $1,000 monthly allowance. But I didn't want to argue, so I reluctantly agreed. Brian, with his charming smile, was very popular. Even when we got married.
Why would he marry someone older? There are plenty of prettier women out there.
Female colleagues were jealous. Brian must have been facing troubles I didn't know about. If job stress could make him sick, then changing jobs was the better option. I was willing to work more for that. Since he lived at home until we got married, it was understandable he wasn't good at housework. I hoped he would get better with time. But my hopes were quickly dashed. At first, he would rinse the dishes and put them in the dishwasher, even vacuum the house, but after 6 months, Brian completely stopped doing any housework. For instance, one day, after an early morning start in overtime, I came home tired to find breakfast dishes still in the sink, and a pot that only needed reheating was left in the fridge. Sorry, I've been busy too. You know, looking for a better part-time job. Brian made an excuse while lounging on the sofa. The laundry was also wrinkled, left in the washing machine. Brian, who works a 3-hour part-time job 3 times a week, was off today.
I'm busy right now, Lily, can you make it?
I reluctantly asked Brian as I put the pot on the stove. Just like I said before, work is really hectic for me right now. So, I'd really appreciate it if you could take on a bit more of the household chores. Leaving for work at 6 a.m. and getting back at 8 p.m. doesn't leave much time for anything else.
Then Brian frowned unpleasantly. I do take out the trash and clean my own room. And I bring in the laundry when it starts to rain.
Yeah, and that helps. But preparing meals alone takes up all my time. I even make your lunch.
Don't get all high and mighty over that.
I stared at Brian with wide eyes. Brian twisted his face and spat out irritably.
Just because you earn a little, you're acting all superior. That's disgusting. You only got to be an assistant manager and earn more than me because of everyone else's support. Don't you understand that?
Leaving me speechless, Brian went upstairs with his mobile phone in hand and slammed the door of his study. Since then, Brian's selfish behavior became even more apparent. If I used the dryer because I couldn't rely on Brian, he would complain later.
I was planning to hang the laundry properly. You don't trust me, do you, Lily?
On another sunny day, trusting Brian and not using the dryer, I came home to find the laundry still in the washing machine. During such a weekend, while Brian was out, Zoe suddenly showed up. It takes an hour and a half by car from the in-laws' house, so we only visit together at Christmas. I remember being scolded by Zoe when Brian left the room during our pre-marriage meeting.
Marrying a woman 4 years older? Brian could have anyone he wanted, why choose you?
Knowing that Zoe didn't like me, I wished she would leave soon but still offered her slippers. Then, standing at the entrance, Zoe snapped at me.
What do you think you're doing, making Brian do all the work? Excuse me? Making Brian do the housework, you're a terrible wife. I knew we shouldn't have let him marry you.
I retorted, albeit confused. With all due respect, I work full-time too, so we're sharing the chores. Though recently, Brian hardly does anything. Zoe's eyes widened, and she yelled at me.
Of course you do, you're the woman. Listen, Brian is delicate and fragile. If he collapses because of you, I'll sue you.
Yelling one-sidedly, Zoe left. When Brian came back from shopping and I told him about Zoe's visit.
Aha.
He replied indifferently. I wish you wouldn't discuss our private matters with Mom. I wanted to argue, but it felt like complaining, so I ended up not saying anything to Brian.
I'm tired today. I'm busy too.
Brian started using excuses like these to dump all the household chores on me and then caused an even bigger problem. When I tried to use my credit card at the grocery store on the way home from work, the payment was inexplicably declined. Shocked, I checked the app and found the card maxed out with charges I didn't recognize. Thinking it was a mistake, I contacted the credit card company and found out Brian had racked up nearly $10,000 in game charges and brand clothing purchases. He remembered the PIN I gave him when we bought an appliance and used it without permission. I couldn't overlook this and confronted Brian as soon as I got home.
Why are you using my credit card without asking? You have your own, don't you? $1,000 a month isn't nearly enough. Then maybe you should work more? It's a waste to spend all your time playing games at home.
Brian glared at me with a terrifying look. I braced for a yelling, but he just clicked his tongue and left the living room. His footsteps were heavy as he went upstairs, slammed the door to his study, and didn't come out for the rest of the evening. And from the next morning, he started ignoring me.
Good morning. I'm off.
No matter what I said, Brian would not even glance at me, sitting on the sofa and fiddling with his mobile phone. When I rushed to make and serve dinner, he would eat while laughing at videos on his phone, leaving his dirty dishes on the table before going to take a shower. And so, Brian would not make eye contact with me, ignoring any attempt at conversation. Of course, he never initiated any conversation with me either, acting as if I had suddenly become invisible. I had a plan I wanted to discuss, but under these circumstances, I couldn't bring it up. Then came the payday for Brian's part-time job. As usual, I put the $1,000 allowance in an envelope and handed it to him. Brian snatched it away and started to leave.
Hey, can you give me the $700 for groceries and utilities?
I called out to his back, but he went upstairs as if he hadn't heard me at all. I felt like holding my head in despair. With the rent, utilities, taxes for both of us, insurance, and communication costs all on me, life gets pretty tough without that $700. But since Brian seemed unwilling to give it, I reluctantly paid it out of my own savings and allowance. As the days of being ignored by Brian continued, I found myself overwhelmed with a heavy mood all day long. By evening, I'd be engulfed in gloom, seriously not wanting to go home. I'd kill time in restaurants or grocery stores after work, even staying in business hotels. But in the end, running away from the problem solved nothing. If Brian's mood improved, we might not be lovey-dovey, but at least we could have normal conversations. Maybe when I get home today, he'll respond as if nothing happened. Though it didn't happen tonight, maybe when we wake up, he'll say,
"Good morning,"
with a smile. Holding on to that hope, I was ignored for 3 months, until my body reached its limit. I could hardly eat, losing 8 pounds. Brian just laughed and scrolled through his phone, leaving his finished plate on the table and moving to the sofa, seemingly oblivious to me eating oatmeal with a pale face. I put down my spoon, stood up, and went to Brian with a voice so faint it might disappear. "Hey, I'm at my limit." Brian seemed annoyed by me, stood up from the sofa, and went upstairs to his study. I slowly rinsed the dishes, loaded the dishwasher, wiped my hands, turned it on, and left the kitchen. This isn't right. I need to talk to Brian. Tomorrow's my day off, so it's a good chance to talk without worrying about time. Halfway up the stairs, I heard Brian's elated voice. He seemed to be on the phone with Zoe.
"Mom, Lily is still acting all high and mighty. I'm so fed up. Can you introduce me to someone cute? It's okay, she's totally into me. She won't complain even if she finds out."
My breath almost stopped. How much does this man look down on me? Asking his own mom to set him up with someone else, unforgivable. I bit my lip and muttered in my heart, "Just you wait. I'll make you regret trampling on my feelings." My feelings for Brian cooled instantly, and I put into action a plan I had been considering for a while. I waited until Brian was asleep, took only my ID, and left the house. I stayed in a hotel that night, and in the morning, I contacted a real estate agent saying,
"I want to move in earlier."
They agreed readily. After sorting out the gas, electricity, and water, I returned home while Brian was at his part-time job, and had the movers take my things to the new place. The apartment we lived in was a new designer apartment costing $1,500 in rent alone. I would have been happy with a cheaper place, but Brian insisted. So, when Brian quit his full-time job, I started looking for a cheaper, used apartment. I had planned to discuss it with Brian, but since he started ignoring me, I went to viewings alone and prepared to move as soon as his mood improved. But after hearing yesterday's conversation, I had no intention of telling Brian or Zoe where I moved. I decided to divorce and live on my own. Brian initially ignored the fact that I had left the house and didn't contact me at all. But after a month, he started calling my mobile phone incessantly, day and night. My message inbox was filled with Brian's desperate messages. "Lily, where are you? It's terrible to just leave like that. I got a notice that the rent couldn't be withdrawn. It's supposed to come out of our account, right? Did you forget to deposit? Deposit the money immediately. I'm getting reminders for the utilities, mobile phone bills, and even from the car insurance company. Put some money in, quickly. By the way, where's my $1,000 allowance?"
It's your choice to leave, But it's a problem if you don't pay for things. It's common sense for the one with money to pay, right?
How am I supposed to live on $800 a month? Don't ignore me. Brian was the one who ignored me first. I was just doing the same thing he did, but why is he so angry? And yet, no apology, just selfish demands. While I was dumbfounded reading the messages, Zoe called. I didn't want to answer, but ignoring her would only cause more trouble, so I reluctantly pressed the talk button. Hello.
Seriously, Lily. Running away from home and leaving Brian behind, what are you thinking? Acting on your own despite being his wife. Come back right now.
I sighed and calmly retorted. I'm not going back to that house.
Huh? You plan to abandon your duties as a wife? Who's going to take care of Brian? Brian is 30, not a toddler. He can take care of himself. If you're so concerned, maybe you should move in and take care of him? My word. The one who really acted selfishly was him.
I explained with restrained anger and in a calm voice.
He quit his job to work part-time 3 days a week. His salary dropped, and even though I only asked for help with groceries and utilities, I couldn't even get that. Then he started using my credit card without permission, and when I confronted him, he began ignoring me. That's why I left.
Zoe fell silent all of a sudden. After a while, she muttered, confused.
Wait, he quit his job? The major company he was so proud to get into to please his mom? Yes. He quit suddenly one day without any discussion, saying we could live on my salary alone. Sure, I earn a decent wage because I'm his supervisor. But it was shocking when he quit out of the blue.
Well, I suppose. Zoe sounded baffled.
So, for the past year, Brian has been living off my salary. And he wouldn't even do the household chores. If you don't believe me, I can forward you the messages from Brian.
It seemed Zoe had no idea Brian had quit his job. When I sent Zoe the message Brian had recently sent me, she explained in a soft voice. Brian has been consulting with me frequently.
What about?
Well, he said he's working hard, even doing overtime and working on holidays, but you hardly work because you're tired and neglects the housework. He said that you're living off his salary, yet you act all high and mighty, and that he's fed up and wants to have fun with a cute girl to relieve stress. That's what he told me.
That's the complete opposite of the truth.
I was utterly dismayed by Brian's lies, even to Zoe. How much more can he disrespect his life? He probably thinks Zoe will scold him and then he'll just come back home.
First off, I've never heard of a mom looking for affair partners for her son. What are you thinking, Zoe?
I pressed Zoe with a stern tone, and she started making excuses. Well, he says married life is tough, and he's venting. If he gets sick from stress, it'd be terrible. If matching him with a young girl makes him happy, it's a small price to pay.
I couldn't get any living expenses, and after being ignored for 3 months, I was the one who nearly got sick. Besides, that's disrespectful to any woman you introduce him to. Well, handsome Brian is popular, so even though he's married, there are surely women who'd want to date him. Well, if he were still working at that company, that is.
That's not the problem, I thought bitterly. It's no wonder talking to Zoe was getting nowhere, like mother, like son. It seems divorce is the only option.
Divorce? It doesn't have to come to that. He's probably regretting it by now.
Zoe suddenly started panicking. She cares most about appearances. She must want to avoid her successful, good-looking son getting divorced at all costs. I made it clear.
Regretting? How? I'm not his ATM. It's best if he divorces me, then he can play around and spend money however he likes. That's... Lily, can't you reconsider? He needs you.
Zoe pleaded, but I coldly informed her.
Brian seems likely to drag out the divorce, so I'll be hiring a lawyer. Please direct any further communication through them. I'll be seeking compensation for the ignored period and the unpaid living expenses, as well as the unauthorized credit card charges.
Can Brian even afford to pay that? Zoe muttered as if it were someone else's problem.
If the son can't pay, then the parents will have to. What? That's why I'm asking you to let Brian know I want a divorce. I'm counting on you.
Lily, please, reconsider. I hung up without listening to the rest of Zoe's plea. The next day, I called a lawyer to discuss the divorce, secured an appointment for consultation, and felt a bit relieved. While enjoying a week of paid leave in my new place and unpacking, my mobile phone signaled a message. I wanted to block Brian and Zoe's contacts, but until the divorce was finalized, there might be a need to communicate. So, I left their contacts unblocked, without setting them to reject calls. I realized it was a mistakenly sent message. It appeared Zoe, not adept with mobile phones, had accidentally posted in the family group chat thinking it was a message to Brian personally. I decided to read it as well since it was shared. Brian, this isn't what we talked about. I was humiliated.
What's wrong?
You quit your job to work part-time 3 days a week? There was a pause. Did you hear that from Lily? Yes. Living off Lily's salary? It's shameful for a man to earn less than a woman. Mom, don't say such outdated things. That's why I kept it a secret. Brian quickly retorts. Well, nowadays there's something called a house husband, so if you were working properly, that would be fine. But working only 3 days without doing any housework and still acting all high and mighty? Anyone would want a divorce, not just Lily. Surprisingly, Zoe was on my side, likely disappointed in Brian.
Stop pestering me. I won't divorce. She's in love with me and will come back regretting it soon.
I couldn't help but scoff. I was stunned. Still saying such things. Where does his confidence that his wife wouldn't despise him no matter how badly he treated her come from?
What happened to introducing me to a young and cute girl? That's off the table. Why? I was looking forward to it. Do you even understand your situation? No girl wants to get close to a 30-year-old man living off his wife's salary and working part-time.
I burst out laughing, imagining Zoe's exasperated face.
Someone will be out there. You know I've always been popular, Mom.
If you were still employed at a prestigious company and a university graduate, there might be girls willing to date you, hoping for more, even if it's an affair. But not the current you.
Really?
Brian's response was ever so nonchalant against Zoe's anger. You can still make it. Go back to working at a big company like before.
No, it's bothersome. Living off Lily's salary and lazing around is much easier.
Brian's carefree admission was appalling.
That's not how it works. Lily is planning to divorce you and claim compensation, including the credit card charges. I don't have that kind of money. If a bill comes, you'll pay, right? You have Dad's inheritance. You'd be happy to use it for your beloved son, right?
Then Zoe's replies stopped. Mom? Hey, we're not done talking. Respond, please. After a pause, the message resumed.
Why aren't you picking up the phone? Don't ignore me.
Zoe had blocked Brian. While pondering this, Brian called me. Ignoring it led to a voicemail message. He rambled on in several messages. Mom has disowned me. Lily, you wouldn't abandon me, would you? It's okay you left. Come back home. You're not serious about divorce, are you? You're just sulking, right? Fine, I'll agree to a divorce. I guess I was partly at fault. But I can't pay the compensation or the credit card charges. I just can't afford it.
Anyway, keep paying the rent and taxes as usual. Your husband is in trouble. You earn enough to help out, right? And my allowance too.
My astonishment surpassed anger. He probably still doesn't realize he's at fault. A few days later, Brian received a certified mail regarding the compensation and credit card repayment, and, finally understanding the situation and panicking, he sought legal advice.
I love Lily. She's just upset thinking I dislike her. If she comes back now, I'll forgive her.
Such nonsensical claims were made, but under legal advice, realizing I was serious, he turned pale. Despite his reluctance, the lawyer managed to settle the divorce after 6 months. Feeling refreshed, I blocked Brian and Zoe's contacts. Abandoned by Zoe, Brian was at a loss. burdened with the $10,000 compensation, 3 months of unpaid living expenses, $10,000 for unauthorized credit card use, plus his own debts. Of course he was. Brian, who had splurged on branded clothes using the allowance and my credit card, reluctantly sold his purchases for cash. Still short, he pleaded with the lawyer for a monthly payment arrangement. Procedures to seize his account if there was no payment were put in place. Unable to PAF for the rent without my support, Brian moved to an older apartment. He had no choice but to increase his part-time hours to make ends meet. An ex-colleague who spotted Brian mentioned he was so emaciated, they hardly recognized him. I hope this serves as a wake-up call for him to discard his spoiled attitude and embrace independence. Freed from Brian, my earnings no longer drained by him, and liberated from the misery of being ignored, I've recovered fully. As a result of working with more motivation than ever before, I was promoted from assistant manager to manager, and with an increased salary, I'm living busy yet fulfilling days. I aim to balance work and personal life for a meaningful life.